woman's window with a ladder. And one of the ways that people are harassed and pushed out of Hebron is that their doors get sealed shut. So you see a lot of entrances to people's homes going through windows or going through rooftops. The children have to go through checkpoints to go to school. They get garbage thrown at them. There are these awnings so that when the children and when the Palestinian people are walking down the street, there are these awnings that they've had to build to protect them because the settlers will throw dirty water on them or throw garbage on them. So it's just this constant feeling of, and how much can you take of that before you're going to fight back? And it's just a really hard place to be. And even to get to the mosque, again, the restrictions of where you can go. It would take 5 minutes to walk to the mosque, but now the Palestinians, it could take an hour and a half to try to walk and figure out the best route to go through the Palestinian designated areas. This is me at Sarah's tomb, and it was interesting. I didn't anticipate in Hebron as vulnerable and unsettling as it was, that was really a special moment to me, being kind of with the grandmother. And so that was nice. And it generated some conversation with our missionary, Reverend Kristen Brown, and Bishop Hope Morgan Ward, who is the president of our board, as well as the Bishop of the United Methodist in North Carolina area. Wadi Fuqin is another area that it's kind of like Hebron, but it's a rural area. It's an agricultural culture of about 1,200 Palestinians are there now. But again, the settlement, you can see the settlement on the left. They're kind of above the valley, and they've got sewage runoff that goes into the fields. There's lime runoff from their buildings. The settlers will go down and cut down olive trees, which is a pretty common tactic. So people there, they just don't know how much longer the community can even survive. And so I'll kind of talk more about that later as a way that the United Methodists are trying to kind of create some support and some ways to respond and help the people that are there. The segregation wall this is in Bethlehem, was something that, again, I just really didn't know that much about. And it basically is keeping people in one area. It's keeping people out, first of all, of the Israeli areas. And I kind of thought, initially, my original thought on that was, well, how on earth are you going to have, if you're putting up walls, it's very hard to have conversations. But if you feel like you need to protect yourself, and I do believe that Israel has the right to secure borders, then okay, maybe that's the way that you think is best. But what's happening is, then you build it on your side. You build it on your land. They're building it well into the Palestinian territory. So they're taking all of those settlements and they're wrapping this wall through the region around the settlements and taking water sources and really redefining the line that was set in 1948. And so that's an issue. It also just, it's interesting, on the Bethlehem side, you can see it's become a source of resistance. People will show graffiti. So you can kind of tell which side you're on of the wall based on whether or not there's graffiti, but it's really a way that people have been able to express themselves. Our General Secretary, Thomas Kemper, is German, and it was interesting to be with him as he was kind of, on the one hand, really, really grappling with, how, kind of the thought of being German and the Holocaust, and how do you kind of approach this in a way that still honors that. And I sensed that from him a few times, but he also definitely had a connection with the wall and the Berlin Wall. And at the opening of the office in Jerusalem, he offered a word of scriptural hope that German Christians had remembered when dealing with their wall. From Psalm 18:29, he said, "By my God, I can leap over a wall." So it just kind of was one of the ways that he was thinking about it, and really, and it's hard to ignore. I mean, when you have this huge concrete thing there that's keeping people divided. I mentioned earlier having kind of a hard time connecting when I was in the big churches. And one morning we woke up very early, around 4:30 in the morning, and we went to the checkpoint. And this is the way that Palestinians, if they're in Bethlehem, to get to work, if they have a permit in East Jerusalem, they need to go through this process. So you can see it's really a cage by the wall that you just have hundreds of people, like cattle, just going through this. It's about probably as narrow as this table, waiting to go to work. And at the end, there's a turnstile that you have to go through. And then you have to give your thumbprint. You have to show your identification that you have a permit to work there. And there's some other documentation also before you're allowed to go in. And oftentimes what happens is that they might just shut down the checkpoint. So you can't get to work, or you're stuck there for hours in that cage. Like, in that cage for hours, I just can't even imagine. We did it. We got through pretty quickly. Relatively. It was about a half an hour process for us. We had U.S. passports, so we were able to show that, they just kind of let us through. But they also would, for the people that have to do their thumbprints, part of that is to make sure that you go back. So if you're not back by 7 o'clock that night, when they process you, you can get in trouble for that. So how is the church responding? Oh, and actually my point about where I did connect, and I really felt like when I walked through that checkpoint that would be where Christ would have been ministering. It was about as much as in the margins as you can get, and I really felt like that was a place where ministry was happening. I mean, there were people, and I'll talk a little bit later, the Ecumenical Accompaniment program where people are there. And you talked about on the other side, they have the Israeli women that are monitoring, and so you do have people that are ministering there and really documenting and standing up for people and being a ministry of presence as well. I have a copy, but you can also find this document online from Kairos, Palestine. And they are a movement of Palestinian Christians and have really called for Christians around the world to respond. For us as a United Methodist Church, we don't go into places without being invited, and so having been invited by Kairos, Palestine, that was a very important piece of our work of being there in Palestine and Israel. One of the things that they say is, that they tell us is, our question to our brothers and sisters in the churches today is, are you willing and able to work with us to restore our freedom? Our freedom will be the only sustainable foundation for both Palestinians and Israelis to live in. Love, justice, peace, and security. So there really has been a call from the Palestinian Christians for the church to respond. This is Omar Gourami. He works with the Seville Palestinian Liberation Theology Center. He was fascinating. He was fascinating and very charming, and he works with the youth. He can trace his family roots back to the Pentecost. And so he talks about that, how, I'll read the Bible, I'll read a story in the Bible, but those are his family's stories. And I just thought that was just such a different way to look at the history of Christianity and the history of the church. And he talks also about how the missionaries have gone into the region and kind of ruined that and created this different story than what he had learned growing up. And so part of what they do at Seville is really that liberation theology and changing the lens of how people look at their own heritage as Palestinians and giving them a voice. He said that when he was younger in school, I think he went to a Quaker school, that they had a test, and one of the questions was, who did God give this land to? And the expected answer was to the Jewish people. And he said to the Palestinian people. And his friends did that as well, and they got in trouble and had to go to the press. He was about 11 years old. But he couldn't articulate to his Muslim friends that said, we'll stand with you, tell us why we're standing with you. And they didn't feel comfortable sharing that. So it's kind of just, he's just a very interesting person. And I really enjoyed spending the afternoon talking to him. He's planning this Global Young Adult Festival in this coming July, and they're really trying to get youth from around the world to participate in this. One of the things they want to do is to empower the youth that are there, to really feel that the church is supportive of them, that the global church is supportive of the young people that are in Palestine. So they want to choose 5 miracles. This is his plan. They're going to choose 5 miracles that the young people that go to this event will be able to pull off. So whether it's rebuilding a demolished house in a day, or replanting, twice the amount of olive trees that have been cut down, or even doing a flash mob in the old city of Jerusalem. Like, he just has these really interesting ideas about how to respond and how to really show that the church is growing and the church is alive. So if you have people, or young people, or you think that this is something that you would be interested in, his information, it should be in your notes. But I definitely would ask you to contact him, because I think it's we're going to try to, I know that the General Board of Global Ministries is going to try to find some ways to support this, and also support having some young people go. Zugbi is another Palestinian that has long-time roots in Palestine and in Palestinian Christianity. He's with the WIAM Palestinian Conflict Resolution Center, which is literally in the shadow of the wall. And he also has creative ways that he confronts the injustice. One of the things that he said was that they plant gardens and they build playgrounds right up by the wall as ways to really find nonviolent resistance. He says, gardening is healing. We plant a tree, we plant a flower, we develop the compost, and we transform it into a garden. And I thought that was just a really powerful way to say, we're not going to, you can make us not, restrict where we're going and what we do, but you can't break us down. And we're still going to plant our flowers and have a place for our kids to play. And he works a lot with the people in the community to kind of address the trauma. He says it's not post-traumatic stress because it's continuous. It's not post. It's just their way of life. And when you're living like that day after day after day, there's a lot of healing that needs to happen, even as you continue on to the next phase of however you're being oppressed. They have times also that they pray at the wall every Friday, I think. This is the Ecumenical Accompaniment Program for Palestine and Israel. It's a program of the World Council of Churches. Alex on the left, he's a 19-year-old young man who is there for 3 months. He actually just left. He's now in Tizay, taking some spiritual retreat time. But essentially, I mentioned that there were people at the checkpoints that were documenting, and those were ecumenical accompaniers. But they also go into those places like Hebron or into Wadi Fukim, where they're standing with the people, and it's really, part of it is solidarity, part of it is they hold passports from different countries, not from Palestine or Israel, so they're given a little bit more opportunity and kind of layer of protection in what they're doing. But they do document what's happening, and kind of by being there, we see a lot of the violence that kind of doesn't happen as much. This is a letter that went out while we were there, I believe. And I have the actual letter and an article that goes with it, if we can pass that around. These were different different church leaders that signed a letter asking Congress to really investigate what's happening in Israel. Rosemary Wenner is the president of the United Methodist Council of Bishops, was one of the signers, and we've certainly heard a little bit of pushback on it, but I think for the most part it's been pretty supportive. I actually don't think the letter is terribly strong. I think it's not terribly controversial, but it's just looking at the deteriorating conditions and how do we address that. As for churches in the U.S. particularly, we are taxpayers, and so as part of a democracy, we're accountable as well, and we need to hold our Congress accountable for the ways that we're supporting what's happening. The United Methodist response, there's a United Methodist Kairos response, which again, that goes back to the responding to this Kairos Palestine document. From the beginning of the United Methodist Church formed as a merger in 1968, and since that time, since that very first General Conference, the United Methodist Church as a denomination has raised concerns for the full rights of Palestinian refugees. There is support for Israel as well to have secure borders. Definitely has been a sense that we want to end the settlements, the home demolitions, and the destruction of olive trees. We have, at this last General Conference, there was a movement to boycott settlement products. And these are some of our church leaders that were in Palestine. That's Thomas Kemper, our General Secretary, on the right. He said, as growing in part, this was Thomas at the opening of the office, growing in part out of the Kairos Palestine process, we as Methodists have come together to deepen our ecumenical commitment to join in partnership with your fruitful presence in this holy land, with shared hope that a just peace will transform enemies into neighbors. And so I also brought the purpose statement of the office that we opened in October. So just to kind of get a sense of why we're there, and it is a partnership with the Methodist Church in Britain and the World Methodist Council. Our relationships are with the different churches in the Middle East, and so this picture is showing the Lutheran and the the Lutheran bishop and the patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church, who are local there. We have 5 United Methodist missionaries who are serving in the region. We have, through the United Methodist Church and the General Board of Global Ministries, there are churches that support these missionaries, and we certainly welcome anybody that wants to be in a covenant relationship with them to, you can talk to me or go to our website, umcmission.org, and learn more about how to support their work there. This is Alex and Brenda Awad, and I left copies of our New World Outlook, our current issue, which is all about peace building, but there is an interview with Alex Awad in that issue, and so I invite you to read that at some point later on. And I wanted to also share with you, because I'm going to take a short break and drink some water, but with the situation that was happening in Gaza, and Lori and I had talked about this when we first talked about putting this together, and she asked if I would be able to speak to it. And as it turned out that Alex was in Bethlehem and did, during what we were hearing from because we were checking on our missionaries when the violence in Gaza was happening, even though they were not in Gaza, but we wanted to hear how they were doing. And the violence would escalate also, and the tensions were escalating even in Bethlehem. So it wasn't just in Gaza, it was really creating issues for them in Bethlehem. So this is Alex. He's in Bethlehem during this interview, and you can hear what he has to say about it.
Happening here?
Well, we are witnessing a Palestinian response in Bethlehem to the situation in Gaza. The people